My name is Beverly Sanders, and today is May 22nd, 2013. I'm visiting with Nancy McCall in McFarlin Memorial United Methodist Church in Norman, Oklahoma. This interview is for the historical records of McFarlin United Methodist Church, as well as the Voices of Oklahoma United Methodism project of the Oklahoma Conference Oral History Research Program, which is coordinated through the Commission on Archives and History with the support of the Oklahoma United Methodist Historical Society. Nancy, we appreciate your coming, taking your time out to come answer some questions for us and visit with us about your memories and your history in McFarlin. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your association with McFarlin? And would you also tell us about your late husband James and his association with McFarlin?
Oh, okay, I'm going to check it. Okay, Nancy, you're it. Go ahead.
Okay, I am Nancy McCall, a lifelong resident of Norman. I grew up as a Baptist, but when I married James in 1953, I joined the Methodist McFarlin Church. I was a little hesitant until I started attending. The first time I walked in the church, it was such a reverent place, and you felt like worshiping. And I just felt like it was home immediately, and this is where I wanted to be. James had a wonderful history of being in the church. He had belonged since about 1940. He and his friends played basketball in the old gym, and that was a real significant thing in Norman, that you could come to church and play basketball. Mm-hmm. And I just immediately became involved. We had all three of our children baptized at McFarlin. Finus Crutchfield was the minister at that time. And our bulletin said on the front of it, before the service, we talk to God. During the service, God talks to us. And after the service, we talk to each other. That was much different than the chatty atmosphere at the Baptist church, and it put you in mood for worship, so I loved it.
And that was in the, so you joined
I joined
in 1953?
Yes.
And so that was when the bulletin said that?
Yes.
I never noticed it. I'm sorry I interrupted. Anything else that you were going to tell us about?
Oh, just like James loved the church, and he had a real history of the people here. He had lived in Norman most of his life. He lived away about 3 years when he was in junior high, but when he was back as a senior, Phil Dashner was his Sunday school teacher, and later on in the fellowship class, and I don't know what years, but in the 70s, Dr. Dashner was our Sunday school teacher again, and it was a real honor for James to be able to serve as a pallbearer for his service when he died.
And what you've already said that McFarlin was a very reverent place, and talked about the feeling at it. What was it like as far as the building itself? As you looked around, just what was your impression of the building, aside from being simply a reverence inspiring, and of the congregation themselves? I
felt like I was in a cathedral in Europe. The sanctuary was so beautiful. I had been here only for my high school baccalaureate before I started attending with James. Mm-hmm. And there were so many nooks and crannies, and James took me on a tour way up to the bell tower of the church, and I thought, how exciting.
So you've been in the bell tower?
A long time ago, yes.
What were some of the offices that you and or James served the church? Why don't we start with yours, and then you can go to James's. We
did almost everything together. We both served on almost every commission of the church. We started out from the trustees, administrative board. Every year we were on something, evangelism. And what a joy for somebody to say that they thought Norman would be too big to come and visit. But the next week, after they were there on Sunday, Monday night, James and Nancy called on them, and they decided, hey, this is a friendly church that cares about us, and so we will join here instead of a small church. Mm-hmm. And they became such big contributors to the church. Mm-hmm. And you thought, well, I had some small portion in that. I mean, that was James's point in life, was to serve other people, whatever he could do to help anybody. And he didn't care if he had any glory for it. He just wanted to help. He just wanted to do things for others. He had a superb compliment from Dr. Wayne Coffin when he was ill right before he died. He came and visited, and he said, "I've always wanted to tell you, I think you were the most philanthropical person I've ever met." And it was so nice that he said that, because James liked to hear that he was accomplishing what he wanted to do. He didn't want things spoken like that at his funeral, other people to know what he did. He just wanted to be successful in serving himself, you know. So.
Did it seem, when you first came, you said you came in 53, so you came as an adult, right?
Right.
And did you feel like that McFarlin was crowded at that time? Like, were the Sunday school classes crowded? Were they meeting in odd places like they did in later years? Or?
No, that started probably in the 60s, where we had Sunday school classes almost on stairways, and that's when we started seeing a need to enlarge. I think because we are a church that was, what's the word? McFarlin's, everybody thought that they were taking care of the church, that they didn't need to give the money they needed to give. And we were always working on the budget, on the committees. We began tithing year after we got married. At that time, it was $300 a year. We made $3,000 a year. We owned our home, and living expenses were very reasonable then. And that was an easy thing to do. But then we realized how we were blessed by God when we were able to be some of the largest contributors to the church, which was not anything to talk about. It just made you feel good that you could see God blessing you.
Was your Sunday school class, the fellowship class, already in existence when you first came?
It was. Stuart Harold was our Sunday school teacher when we joined the class. And a friend from my circle invited me to the fellowship class. And we loved it from the start. Stuart Harold's wife had been James's music teacher in 5th grade, so she was a lovely person also. She later, after he died, married Harold Hunicke, who was one of the most wonderful treasures of this church, giving up his time and his money.
When, to your memory, did we first begin to hear that we were considering expansion as something that could be done in the immediate future?
Well, goodness.
Or maybe I should rephrase that as something that we should begin to get ready to do.
Well, we knew we had outgrown the church, but basically before that we had a parking problem, and we were buying properties for parking. And I think we actually owned a couple of properties to the north of the church on University Boulevard, but family members lived in houses on Sim Street, and they were very happy when the parents died to sell to the church, so we had gotten a piece of properties very
Now, which one is that? Which property?
The Blatchley family and the Fitzgerald. Pauline Blatchley was Pauline Fitzgerald, and they were neighbors, and we got those two properties first, I think. And we slowly tried to do the others, and it took a special person, or group of people like Marion Bauman and James McCall and Harold Hunicke, to know how to deal with people, to make them think it would be wonderful for their home to turn into church property. And there were a couple of people that didn't really feel that way. And one of the first properties that we bought very easily at a time when we had absolutely no money in the budget was the the northeast parking lot. There was a beautiful home there. The people had had an architect come from out of town, maybe out of state, to design it and custom build it. But she was a sweet, dear lady, a teacher. James had worked across the street at the grocery store when he was in college, and he always insisted on carrying her groceries home, so he developed a wonderful relationship with her. So she came to us saying that she had several properties around the church. James and I purchased 4 properties, little houses on the east side of the church, right next to where the service station is. And we just used,
Actually, that's the south side, right?
excuse me, south side of the church.
Yeah, okay.
Before that, East purchased, from her, she owned all these properties. We bought those 4 properties from her, used them as rental properties, hoping to have them for the church when they needed them. And then the house that she lived in, she was ready to sell it. She decided to go live with her daughter, and we had no money. And James and I thought, well, we could buy that as a rental property, but it's really a nice thing to use for a rental property. We don't know how that'll work out. And James, Marion, and Harold Hunick, he was treasurer at that time, all discussed it, and Harold said, I can buy that house for the church. And then when the church has the money, I'll let him have it for the same price I bought it for. That was just an answer to prayers, because that really got us started on owning the rest of the property. The house to the east of the church was an older family in Norman that had business downtown, barber drug stores, and the Barber family owned that property. And the 2 older widow ladies lived in it, and they did not, the church had been a bother to them with parking and people walking across the yard and everything. They did not want the church to have it. And it took some time to get, but everything else, except for one house, James visited around, and I don't know how many years it really took to buy all this, but it was really in the late 70s, I think, when we really started getting all the property together. We had one house, the lady said, I don't want to sell. I'm going to live here till I die. My daughter lives with me. My mother lived here. She planted all the flowers in the yard, and I will not sell my church, my house to the church.
That was the one directly north of the church, the one kind of in the middle of the block, directly
Yes,
north.
in the middle of the block. Well, we ended up starting to build the addition on the church without owning Margaret's home. She was a Catholic. But again, James had a way with people, and he called and told her that we had gotten the addition mostly finished, and we were going to hook up the electricity to the large power station we have out there, and we would have the electricity off all day. Would she tell us a day that would be convenient for her? And she said, well, I spend all day Wednesday at the church, so that would be great. I'll just be gone. James had always told Phil he was really praying hard for that last house to come available. That day, while the workmen were working, they saw smoke coming from her house.
They did what?
Saw smoke coming from her house.
Oh.
So they called the fire department, had the fire put out, and so she was then indebted to the church that they had saved her home. It was also so smoky she couldn't live in it. But James, where can I live? I want to stay in this location. James says, I have a rental house 1 block east of here on Apache Street that I would let you move in that and just stay there as long as you like, Margaret. So Margaret did that, and about 6 months later decided she'd buy a house and move out. So then we were able to tear down the church and finish everything we wanted to do.
Do you know anything about the house that was on this corner over here, the one that does, that is now got the gazebo on it?
Well,
I'm confused over whether that house
Eddie Wild
was moved or torn down.
Eddie
It was a big
Wild-
one. Big
Eddie
two-story
Wild
house.
was the second house. The corner house was a rental property owned by somebody, not a native Norman person. And in times when the rental, real estate market goes up and down, and it was not renting too well, and I think James and Marion, and I don't know who else I'm leaving out. I know there were other people that were influential. Buddy Pendarvis, different people talking. The gentleman agreed to sell it. And next door to it was Eddie Wild, and she had a large home and rented out rooms. She was at one time our church cook and was a member of our church. And so when she was no longer able to live there, she put the church up for sale. And again, the house up for sale. The church had no money to buy it. And a church member that bought it herself to use for a rental property. And she was a widow lady, and so she made a nice profit selling it to the church when we got the money together to buy it. And so we owned the 4 little houses next door to that. And
Well, this is what I've heard over and over, that it was the goodwill that James and, as you said, Harold and Marion were spreading around the neighborhood that really was responsible for finally acquiring all
It
these.
took a special combination of people to get the property bought, and took a length of time and patience. James and I had bought some houses over in the 400 block of Sims. I'm thinking we might need them, and we donated those to the church. And the church decided to sell that property and keep us all concentrated in the 300 block. And so they used the money from the sale of that to help with the parking lot across the street.
You remember anything about at one point the church had a long-range plan where they had shown buildings to the north of here for the long-range planning committee?
Yes, they really planned on building another structure. The city of Norman zoning is such that they really didn't want us to do that. And if we hadn't had a person as knowledgeable and capable of working with people as Marion Bauman, we wouldn't have ever gotten the things we did do.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want the whole place to turn into a parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want more buildings stretched out over the whole block. It was City of Norman planning that Marion Bauman was so helpful, and he just knew how to massage the right person at the right time to get an answer to some things that we thought we weren't ever going to have. But when they drew up the drawing I have here of the proposed look at the church, and I guess it more than doubled the size of the church when we added on the atrium, and
Did you say double the size? I don't know.
more than doubled. I think we had more, we added more square footage than we originally had.
I see. Okay, so eventually the church had acquired all these properties and was ready to think about building. What do you remember about the Spirit is Building campaign?
Well, it was a very exciting thing, like I say.
Do you know about when it started?
I can't
Or
remember
approximately
the
even?
exact date. I should have looked at my church
Well, that's okay.
contribution
It's
record
okay
because,
if you don't
well,
know.
I'll tell you, because we had a 5-year program, I think, and so we finished in 2001, so we must have started in 1996 or something. It couldn't have been that long ago, really, because when Jean Powell retired, we hired a new church general secretary manager, and she was at the first meeting we had at our home, where we had more than 40 people to show the video of all of our plans and everything. And it couldn't have been that long ago.
Okay, well, that's all right. You were telling me earlier how the campaign was organized.
Well, it had 2 main leaders, 2 couples, Marion and Diane Bauman, and Andy Payton and his wife. And his wife's family had been members of the church for 4 generations. And he's a person that works with people in a capacity like that. He's worked with United Way and different things, and he knew how to get people together. But the problem that the gentleman brought to us from Dallas was that we needed to involve everyone. And so those 2 gentlemen picked, I think, 10 couples, and then each one of us needed to pick 5 couples. So we had 50 people right there inviting people for a neighborhood coffee and our meeting. It could be a morning coffee, an afternoon tea, or an evening dessert and coffee. And everybody in the church was individually invited to come to a house. So everybody was involved. Nobody felt left out. And they responded very well, like I say. Carol Warner was the church secretary at that time, and she called and said, "Nancy, how many people do you have room for at your house?" And I said, "Well, I had, groups of 50 or so here that would sort of come and go." But she said, "We need to watch the video." And she said, "And I have more than 50 people wanting to come to your house." And I said, "I thought he told us that never happened." And she said, "Well, he said it only ran into that once, but some people that had a new house. Do you have a new home?" And I said, "No, I have some new wallpaper in my 20-year-old kitchen. But anyway, I said we can manage because we can use the living and dining room for people to visit while half of the people are in the family room watching the video. And then we can take turns, and so we showed it twice.
So you showed the video twice?
And I think just because James and I have lived in Norman forever and have a convenient location, we may have had one of the larger crowds, if not one of the larger homes. But
So the Spirit is Building campaign, we had, along with that, a celebration, I believe, on Palm Sunday at Lloyd Noble Center.
yes, and this was again with church. We always had to have at least 2 services, if not 3, to get everybody involved, and especially on Palm Sunday we had large groups. So I think Ann Carlson was the chair of the administrative board at that time
I don't remember.
and was the leader at Lloyd Noble Center, and it was kind of nice to have a lady. You would think a man would need to be up there projecting, but she was the leader of explaining everything and getting the decisions of us signing our pledge cards for it. I kind of think it was a 5-year period that we pledged for the first pledge, and we had bids on the church, and it was going to cost $450,000. We didn't want to start until we had all the money pledged, and we did get that $450,000 pledge. But as time moves along and the economy changes, the church, it was going to cost at least $2 million more to build. So we formed a second committee after we started that would have ask people to do second pledges. And so many of us that were active and interested in this project immediately went ahead and pledged another third of our original pledge and added that much more to our budget. But some people thought, I don't know, this is all I can get. There are a lot of people on fixed incomes and everything. So we didn't get that realized for a really long time. But we did take out a loan to finish the church, which we had not wanted to do, finish the addition.
What was your impression of the service itself at Lloyd Noble?
It was fabulous. I've been there for hundreds of sporting events, and to have it be capable because of the surround sound and everything about it. We did sit basically on one side, but everybody could see the speakers, and we had the presentation of the whole program, and everybody seemed so enthusiastic about it. Maybe it's because they were used to being enthusiastic at the sporting events, but it really went over very, very well.
Did you and James, or either or, have a role in while the construction was going on in any of the committees or building committee or any of that sort of thing?
James did a lot of conferring with the architects and people that were building stuff, especially the kitchen, since he had run a restaurant or worked in a restaurant business for many, many years, and he had always been a consultant to our old kitchen, and so he wanted to be sure of this one. And we had visited large churches in Houston, their kitchens and things, and he was a consultant on that. I'm
sure that James was very instrumental in selecting the architect and getting the plans approved on that.
I really think some of the more engineering type people in the church may have worked on that, like maybe Fred Seals. I'm trying to think of some of those older people that contribute so much, and Fred Zaffey. And
can you think of other people or other events that I have missed that you'd like to talk about? I see you have brought the plans that were distributed to so many different committees and all, and do you have anything there that you need to show us, or like I said, or somebody else reminded us?
Well, I think this was
that
maybe
you
one of
mentioned?
our original little drawings of what the church would look like, and we did.
Turn around and show it to the camera.
We did go as a committee to Oklahoma City and visit a church that had an atrium similar to what we did, and I also went to a UMW meeting there and saw how it functioned, and it. What do you call it, a district meeting, and we saw how wonderful this would be. and it really turned out as well, if not better than we expected. The thing was, we had all of our church dinners in Meyer Hall. And so, with our church so large, we started having to have 2 church dinners on things like we'd have to have them Tuesday and Wednesday night. So we really, really needed a big enough place to have total gatherings for the church. Social in nature, but for special holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so that was just a dream come true, that we could have a place that everybody could get there one night. And of course, they don't all really fit downstairs. Some of them also come to the atrium. We could expand up to the atrium and set tables up there also. And it was wonderful having the little kitchen in the atrium for Sunday morning. I think that made the church so much more personable, to be able to have coffee with in this. In the Woodlands United Methodist Church, where they always had coffee and donuts, and you always felt so welcome when you visited there and got to know some of the members. And so that was a wonderful thing that we had added, this Sunday morning fellowship time with the atrium.
You think of anything else that you'd like to mention? Anybody or anything or any incidents?
I just mainly remember that it was such an answer to prayer when we were able to buy the Barber property. And I think Buddy, as an attorney, and Marion, and we had a person that came that was a member of the church for a short time, worked with he came here as an officer at what was then
Now, who was this?
City National Bank. I want to say his name was Izzard.
John Izzard.
John Izzard. And he worked for the bank, and that's where the trust was held for the Barbers.
I see.
And so that was somebody who was just here for a short time that contributed a lot, because he worked with Buddy and James and Marion to figure out how we could get the trust and just give her a lifetime estate in until she died, and buy the house through the trust. And that one, and the idea that Harold Hunicke purchased that one property with his money. Those are the 2 things I remember so definitely. This is kind of a funny story about Margaret. We got her house just by accident, and her family wanted to sell it to the church. It turned out well. She was happy, very happy.
Well, I guess if you don't remember any more, and I don't have any more questions, we'll just say thank you very much for your time and your contribution, and digging into your memories to share these things with us.
I don't remember how you can remember all the things connected to the church. James was always connected to the Boy Scout program and things like that we do. Our son came to church came home from hospital Sunday. The next Sunday he was at church and never missed a day in his life. But the Scout program probably influenced him, even though he had a wonderful father. And as much as anything in his life, and James was an assistant scout
That was
leader
your
for
son
Joe Blake.
in the Scouts.
And
Was James involved in the Scout program?
he was assistant leader to Joe Blake in the Scout program. And he was, of course, the den master when we had the Cub Scout den here. And so I was just trying to think if I left out any areas, because James worked in them all. I don't know, a committee or something he didn't work with. But things like that the church can do is sponsor a Scout program.
James was part of the first prayer breakfast, right? He was part of the first prayer breakfast.
Yes, James was. We started a prayer breakfast one year on Palm Sunday 50 years ago. And the week week before Christmas, the week before Easter, James came with a group of men. I only want to believe there were about 20 of them, and there's probably only about 5 of them still living. But they're people that never miss, like Preston Trimble and James McCall, and Buddy Pendarvis was real regular at the time. People that were interested in the church. but it became a really thing for James to invite new young people. He loved his job as an usher at the church. That it was so important to him to make a good first impression when we came. When you met people for the first time in the church, and he invited a lot of young people that came to church to come to men's prayer breakfast.
Well, McFarlin has been very fortunate to have had you and James both. I know that you have played down your own role, but I can think of many things that you have been involved in. I know particularly any of the activities that involved being simply gracious as far as some of the meals and some of the activities. Were you involved in the UMW's when they had the circle that did the wedding receptions?
Yes, I was in charge of the
I
wedding
probably so.
receptions for a few years, and I always worked on the committee. Made a lot of money for the church and was a wonderful service to the people that needed it. Especially when my daughter got married. They served the reception for us, and when my son got married, Methodist women served it. And there are a lot of things that we can't keep all of them up, but they all have wonderful memories of the things that we've done that have affected so many people. And I don't know how people get by without the church in their lives. We learned a lot, I think, from Tom Wilson. He was the head usher before James took over for the morning service. And James always, till Tom died when he was 94, let him realize he was the one in charge. Though he didn't drive, and James had to pick him up to bring him to church. But his daughter Margaret and I graduated high school together. And he said he was a Catholic when he came to Norman, and he visited the Methodist church, and he thought he needed it to bring up his family. And he was the first person that got us to go visit a new visitor to the church. And he just said, he just told people they needed their families at church if they wanted to have a good family.
Well, and that was Tom Wilson.
Yes, and I believe Tom Wilson probably had more people that he visited from the Methodist church than almost anybody in the state of Oklahoma. He had a special award
I
for
think
that.
we'll go ahead and call this to a close then. And again, thank you for taking your time and for coming visiting with us. And we certainly